Norma Shearer. We know her today as a woman who shattered the illusion that every woman on screen had to be doe-eyed and naive. She was an adaptable actress that could play a wide range of any character and could do it so well. She was ambitious, relentless, and successful, but although we see her on the big screen, can we really say we know much about her personal life? Let's take a look. Edith Norma Shearer was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, where she lived a very comfortable life. Her father was Andrew Shearer, who owned and operated his own carpentry and lumber manufacture business, which was handed down from his father. He married Edith Mary Fisher in 1899, and 7 months later, they welcomed their first child, Douglas Shearer, who later became a well-known sound designer, who was one of the most important figures in shaping the sound quality of motion pictures back in the day. Their second child, Ethel Shearer, was born in 1900. Like her sister, she was an aspiring actress. However, her career did not succeed past her appearance in 3 1920 silent films. On June 12, 1902, Norma was born. Although she was given the first name Edith, just like her mother, she was called by her middle name, and this is what she kept as her stage name. Norma recalled her childhood being a very prosperous one, and ever since she saw her first vaudeville show in 1911, she'd aspired to be in show business. Her mother played a very important part in her ambitions. However, her parents' marriage was falling apart and their finances took a turn. Andrew's business was not doing well during the economic crash, and in the late 1910s, he made the decision to sell the family's business when Canada's economy started to plummet, which resulted in his loss of the family's money in the business deal. Norma had dropped out of school at the age of 14 to work in a music store to help pay the family's debts. In 1920, the Shearers' marriage came to an end and they went their separate ways. Regardless of the downturn of luck, Norma remained determined to keep pursuing her dream. With her mother's encouragement and support, she took Ethel and Norma with her to New York, while keeping a friendly relationship with Andrew and Douglas, who remained in Canada. Edith believed in her daughter's future in show business and wanted to give them the best opportunities she could. When they arrived in New York, Norma was horrified to see their new place of residence, which was substantially different than the luxury she was accustomed to. All they had the means to afford was a one-bedroom apartment with only one cot and one stove. They did not have an in-house bathroom. They would have to share with the other tenants in the building. They were next to a railroad track, which would have the building shake from such terrible noise all throughout the day and night. Norma's ultimate goal was to audition for the part of a Ziegfeld girl, and within a short amount of time of arriving in New York, she was able to meet the man himself. She had a letter to formally introduce her to Ziegfeld from her former theater coach. Ziegfeld got one look at her and turned her down instantly. He claimed to call her a dog and criticized her appearance. He openly pointed out her cross eyes and large structure. These were things that Norma had already recognized in herself, and it did not deter her. After her unfortunate meeting with Ziegfeld, she went out to audition for Universal Pictures that was looking for 8 pretty girls to play as extras. Ethel and Norma were in line, but were about 50 girls deep. The casting director was going through the girls as he went down the line. He got to pick his 7th girl when Norma knew she had to act quickly. She coughed loudly until she got the man's attention. When he looked towards her, she poked her head up and smiled. He laughed at her attempt and gave her the 8th part instantly. She continued to star in extra parts, including Way Down East, which was directed by the famous D.W. Griffith. She took the gumption to walk right up to him while on filming break and confide her hopes of one day being famous. He studied her figure and declared that her eyes were too crossed and too blue. Her torso was too long and her legs were too short. "You'll never make it," he said, and walked away. Once again, Norma had her appearance pointed out as being what would stop her from achieving stardom. So she went to see an infamous eye doctor of the time, Dr. William Bates. With his guidance, she was able to conceal the flaw that was so bluntly pointed out. Although her brief filming career was coming to a slow halt, she took the time to study Broadway actresses on her nights off and used her performance as a lesson in acting to benefit her own career. Because money was starting to become sparse, she had to pick up a few jobs in modeling.
Your Army and Navy, and then some. I cross my heart.
She modeled for many different ads, but her most successful was her being Miss Lotta Miles for the Kelly Springfield Tires billboard.
You're charming, darling, you're perfect.
It wasn't until 1921 when she got her big break in the B-list movie called The Steelers. Although a success, it wasn't until 1923 when she received her invitation to meet with Louis B. Mayer Pictures in Los Angeles. She was called to sign a contract earning her $250 a week for 6 months, with the option of a renewal and potential lead in The Wonders. At the time, Mayer Pictures was a small-time company. Its new vice president, Irving Thalberg, had only just started his position there. He originally was working as a talent scout for the company when his attention was caught by Norma Shearer and he initiated her contract with Mayer Pictures. Norma was on the next train to Los Angeles with her mother by her side. As soon as she entered the studio, she was met with many criticisms and promptly left. It became very clear to her that although she was more well off than she was in New York, this would not be an easy handout for her. It wasn't until the next day she met with Thalberg to talk about her future employment, and their first meeting had confused her. Because of Thalberg's young age, she thought he was the office boy. She was given her first screen test that did not go successfully. The lighting was not flattering to Shearer, as the trick of the day was to shine light in all angles and hope to not let shadows settle on the actress's face. Her eyes were whited out and looked cross, and her nose looked like it wasn't visible. She was very frantic outside the studio, knowing this was her one chance to get into show business, when the cameraman had caught her in her hysterical state. She explained to him her concerns with the screen test and encouraged him to look for himself. He was very unsatisfied with the result and under his direction was able to reshoot the screen test to make corrections to flatter Shearer rather than to shine her out, and the second time resulted in a huge success. But although she was able to pass this obstacle, the road still remained unpaved for her. She was signed with the intention to be the lead for The Wonders, but the director shot her down claiming that she was too unphotogenic, so she was relinquished to a smaller role. In 1923, while she was working on the film Pleasure Mad, she was called into Mayer's office. She knew that this was her absolute last shot at working for him, and her acting on set was not working for the director, Reginald Barker, which prompted him to report her to Mayer himself. She expected to be fired on the spot, but instead, he asked why she hasn't been able to work to her full potential. Norma simply replied that the director had screamed at her and it was frightening. Suddenly, Mayer sat up from his desk and screamed at Shearer, calling her a coward and accusing her of throwing away her entire career because she couldn't get along with the director. Shearer started to get teary, but stood her ground. She shouted back at him, "I'll show you, you'll see," and Mayer just smiled and said, "That's all I wanted to hear." Mayer had wanted to get a rise out of her to prove that she shouldn't be frightened. Shearer walked back on set and gave her all to that difficult scene, which was a groundbreaking performance. She earned Barker's respect. The next year, Barker used Norma Shearer as the lead in the film Broken Barriers, and Thalberg was so moved by her performance, he casted her in 6 more films. In April of 1924, Louis B. Mayer Productions merged with Metro Pictures and the Samuel Goldwyn Company to form Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM. She was casted as the leading lady alongside John Gilbert and Lon Chaney in the hit film He Who Gets Slapped. The film was well received and delivered above expectations with these 3 major filming companies joining together. Shearer's rise to popularity starts to ensue, and she's offered a new contract with $1,000 a week. However, times were changing in Hollywood, and a new army of actresses would come in and out of the studio often with the same desire and passion to be famous just as Norma Shearer. She knew she had to stay one step above the young faces, and she made sure she was well known. Greta Garbo was new to the scene at this point, and she was taking Hollywood by storm. Shearer knew she had competition with her and would report to Thalberg and beg him to keep giving her leading opportunities. Thalberg ensured her to keep on her path, and what she was being given was keeping her in the spotlight. She paid many visits to Thalberg professionally to keep herself first in line. Anytime there was talk of a new movie being produced, Shearer would be first at Thalberg's door. He didn't mind her keeping him company, so he would listen to her. Her ambition was contagious. Although he was a young man in the world of Hollywood, he became a father figure and somewhat mentor to Shearer. Her talent was unmatched, and she could conquer any character. This was especially realized when she played two leading roles in the 1925 film Lady of the Night, where she played both the virtuous lady and the promiscuous flapper, with them being two separate characters, with the exception of Joan Crawford playing her body double when the scene required Shearer's characters to come in contact with each other. Her career was in full swing, and she was starring in an average of 5 movies every year. She stayed on top of all the other leading ladies and made sure she was a household name. In 1925, Thalberg had asked Shearer to attend a movie with him, and this was when they first started appearing as a couple. Norma admitted to close friends and family that she was in love with him, but in 1927 they started to see other people. They still continued to see each other at work as friends. However, this did not seize her career by any means. She continued to star in films, and every film she was featured in was a guarantee hit. The world demanded Shearer, and she certainly delivered. She was given her first prestigious role in a film worth over $1 million, The Student Prince in Old Heidelberg. It wasn't a critical success, and because of its high budget, failed to make a profit. It wasn't Shearer's best performance due to her being overworked in scenes. She was worked constantly during this film. One day while she finished on set for The Student Prince, she was called into Thalberg's office, where he had a tray of diamond rings laid out on his desk. She was allowed to choose her own ring with the intention of marriage. They were married on September 29, 1927, in a very large and lavish-styled wedding. Norma converted to Judaism so she could marry Thalberg. After their marriage, you may catch Shearer wearing her actual engagement ring in most of her films that required her to play a married woman. October 6, 1927, not long after the newlyweds returned from their honeymoon, the first feature-length talkie film was released, and this put an end to the silent era overnight. This was a huge threat to many silent film actors and actresses who just did not have the voice to make an impact on the screen. Shearer was very worried about this new technology and enlisted her brother, Douglas Shearer, who was a critical asset to sound technology in the filming industry, to help her. He coached her on the best method of speaking and was a foolproof success. In 1929, Shearer starred in MGM's first talkie film, The Trial of Mary Dugan, and it was a huge hit. She had a fluent way of speaking and a slight accent that was very captivating, so much so that other actresses had adapted her slight articulation.
The jury will look upon the prisoner. The prisoner will look upon the jury. How say you, gentlemen? Guilty or not guilty? Not guilty. Mary.
What? Jimmy! Jimmy, am I free? Am I free, Jimmy? Oh, Jimmy! Oh, I'm free, you did it! Oh, I'm free, you Jimmy! did it. You did it, dear. You did it. Oh, isn't it wonderful you did it, dear.
Not only was the film industry changing, society was taking a turn, and Shearer feared her audience would grow tired of her good girl image. Some close friends had suggested that she take some risque photo shoots to show MGM that she can handle more provocative roles. She hired the then unknown George Hurrell to take some seductive pictures, to which she showed her husband. He was instantly impressed and convinced MGM to cast her in their upcoming scandalous film, The Divorcee, knocking Joan Crawford right out of their original consideration. This movie wanted to bring to light a taboo subject. At this time in the world, it was perceived that when a husband has an affair, it didn't mean a thing. But when a wife has an affair, it would automatically become shamed and ruin her reputation. So to go along with that ideology, Shearer's character acts as bad as her reputation and has many lovers as she discovers her husband's affair and they divorce. Meanwhile, her ex-husband is haunted by their past affliction.
Couldn't I have said that the day you asked me to marry you? Supposing I had said, no, Ted, I'm afraid I may meet the women that you've known. And why not? I waited for you. You were my first love.
But this is entirely different.
All right, then. But tonight I come back here, ready to humiliate myself, beg for your forgiveness, ready to forgive you anything because I love you. And you say that's different? You tell me your vanity is hurt?
Well, call it anything you like.
Vanity. I'll never forget that.
Let's not talk any more about it.
And I thought your heart was breaking like mine. But instead you tell me your man's pride can't stand the gas.
Now, wait a minute, Jerry. Listen.
Oh, I don't want to listen. I'm glad I've discovered there's more than one man in the world while I'm young and they want me. Believe me, I'm not missing anything from now on.
I don't doubt it. Once a woman throws down her fences...
Oh, pin it on a motto and hang it where Janice can see it.
Stop that.
Oh, loose women, great, but not in the home, eh, Ted?
Cut it, do you hear?
The looser they are, the more they get. The best in the world, no responsibility. Well, my dear, I'm going to find out how they do it. So look for me in the future where the primroses grow. And pack your man's pride with the rest. And from now on, you're the only man in the world that my door is closed to.
That film won her an Academy Award for Best Actress.
Friends, I'm about to present this award to a person who's very well known to you. I'm going to ask her to come out and meet you. Miss Norma Shearer.
Thank you. I'm very thankful to my fellow workers for the great honor they've bestowed upon me. In taking this award, I feel I'm sharing it with the directors and the writers and the fellow actors whose encouragement made possible whatever degree of success I may have attained. I should like to uphold the position of my sex, but for once a woman is at a loss for words to tell you just what this statue means to me. In encouragement, inspiration, and gratitude.
Thank you, Norma.
Naturally, she was given more films where she starred as the bad girl in the hit pre-code movies. Now she was rivaling the big names of the sexually charged female leaders in the filming industry. Jean Harlow, Greta Garbo, and Joan Crawford. The competition was fierce, and a lot of these other leading ladies found Shearer's position to be unfair. After all, she was married to the best power in Hollywood, and he would always offer her the best roles. Joan Crawford is reported as to saying, "How can I compete with Shearer? She's sleeping with the boss." She became a sex symbol in her own right. Her movies continued to show her as a good girl gone bad, and it struck the audience in a different way. Her style took a different angle than that of her competing actresses. She had audacity and sex appeal, but more importantly, she knew how to carry her characters with dignity and class. Because her characters typically started as an obedient young lady, it made her transition into a rebellious woman all the more desirable. In 1930, Thalberg and Shearer had their first child, a boy named Irving Thalberg Jr. The public went crazy for this popularized family, and if it were more possible, their fans loved this power couple even more. Prior to Irving Jr.'s birth, Shearer was still working, even through her pregnancy. Her last film before taking leave was the film Let Us Be Gay. Because of Norma's pregnancy, the film was recorded in 26 days. She was required to wear loose-fitted clothing, but you can still see the slightest baby bump.
Don't you know what they were?
No, what were they?
Married. Mrs. Brown, Mr. Brown, husband and wife, and there's the result.
In 1931, Shearer's most racy movie came out where she starred with Clark Gable in A Free Soul. This film was considered very scandalous and was banned in Ireland, and Canada highly protested and censored certain scenes. In this movie, Shearer played a mobster's lover, where scenes of them together didn't just taunt the idea of a sexual relationship, it was outright said. In a way, this film changed what the audience wanted in their characters. People liked when the bad boys got the good girls.
Now it's a storm at sea.
You do love me, don't you?
It's madness, nothing else.
Listen, sweetheart.
Oh, dear, he wants to talk some more.
Now, wait a minute.
Eddie. Wait a minute, Eddie.
Shouldn't send a boy to do a man's job.
I'm sorry, Eddie. You hurt?
It's all right. Just took me by surprise, that's all. All right, you big lug. You ready?
Go on outside, Eddie. I'll be all right.
I'm staying right here.
No, thanks, Eddie. Thanks just the same, but I'll be all right. You go on out.
I'll take a walk with you any time you want. And I'll be right outside. Ready?
Ready for what?
We're getting married. Did you forget?
Take your hands off me. I was frightened last night. I was very tired, had a bad time. But you can't really frighten me, Ace.
No?
No.
Getting kind of ritzy this morning, eh?
I'm not lying to myself about you and me. I thought I had the right to do anything I liked. I didn't know till last night what I was really doing to myself. What a beast you were when the surface was scratched. I found out that only swine should travel with swine.
Say, you're talking to the man you love.
It makes me sick to even hear you say the word. I've lost the right ever again to think of what love can be or what it means. Marry you, or the rest of my life can't wash the filthy mark of you out of my soul. That's what I think of you. Now you can go.
Hey, listen, you haven't a chance, not a chance. You've gone too far.
Take your hands off me.
Well, I'm not going to carry you screaming from the hotel, but you can't get away from me. I never was as nuts about you as I am right now. You can be walking along the street or out in your car, but I'll get you. All I'm going to do now is kiss you.
Hello, Wanderer. Just heard you were back. Well, we meet again. How are you? A little early for a call, I'm afraid, but unusual circumstances.
Oh, that's all right. Mr. Wilfong was just going.
Sure. Don't kid yourself for long. I'll be back.
Keep away from me.
Here, don't crowd, old man.
Take your hands off me.
There's a place for those sort of things.
Any idea you're going to marry him?
No, not the slightest.
I hope you change your mind about that, Jan.
Is that so? When I get through, he won't have the guts to marry you. Now, let me lay it on the line for you. She tossed all the Ritz overboard months ago. She came to my place and she stayed there. You get that? She's mine. She belongs to me.
Well, that's all you're going to say just now.
Yeah? Well, I'll spread the news so high, wide, and handsome you don't dare marry her. And you'll come crawling back like you did last night. Maybe I'll step out of my class and give you a break. Listen, buddy. Take a tip. Back out. Right now. If you don't, you won't live long enough to start the honeymoon. And I'm not kidding.
Gable was already well known for playing the gangsters in his prior films. It wasn't until this one came out that his career really made him more desirable for the larger pictures, as this film made him a lot of fangirls. And the chemistry between Clark and Norma was electric, and they starred in several other movies together. However, with Gable's reputation of being a womanizer who slept with all of his co-stars, he did not in particular like Shearer. He claimed that she was very cold on set and was not too friendly. Then again, this is coming from Gable, and we should all know by now that Norma was strictly business. After the production code came out in 1934, Shearer was required to drop the persona that was working so well for her. This was Hollywood's biggest fear, having to be censored. But this didn't falter her career. Because she was so popular and such an asset to MGM, she was instead reserved for more lucrative and expensive films. But this did make it harder for her to act out the characters that she was well reputed to play. Her most successful box office hit in her entire career came out in 1934 in The Barretts of Wimpole Street, where making a profit of $670,000. Because Hays Code was enforced at the start of this film's production, there were some scenes that were against the code that were slipped in and did go without violation.
I don't understand a devotion that demands favors as if they were rights. I don't understand a devotion that spends itself in petty tyrannies and gross bullying. I don't understand a devotion that grudges you any ray of light and glimpse of happiness, doesn't even stop at risking your life to gratify its colossal selfishness. Devotion. Give me good, sound, honest hatred rather than devotion like that.
Mr. Browning, I must ask you to...
Forgive me, but I won't be silent any longer. Even before I met you, I knew that sickness wasn't the only shadow on your life. And all these months, I felt that other shadow deepening, and I've stood by and looked on. But I've done with pretense from today on. It's not just your comfort and happiness which are at stake now, it's your very life. And I forbid you to play with your life. And I have the right to forbid you.
No, no, no. Please don't say any more.
The right. At our first meeting, you forbade me to speak of love. But I knew well enough, we both knew, that I was to be much more than just your friend. Even before I passed that door, I loved you. And I've gone on loving you. And I shall love you to the end and beyond. You know that. You've always known it.
Yes. Yes, I've always known it.
In 1935, they welcomed their second child, a daughter named Catherine Thalberg. Shearer wanted to retire after this, but Thalberg insisted she keep going and that he would get better roles for her. At the Mayfair Ball in 1936, given by Carole Lombard, an infamous meltdown had occurred. Lombard was in charge of throwing this party and had requested all girls attend wearing white. While all the women respected this dress code, a few showed up in light pastels, but Shearer showed up in a grand style in a vivid red dress, making her stand out from the crowd. Lombard had to be restrained from throwing a drink at Shearer, but this was just a stunt. Norma needed to keep herself noticed, and that she did. Many rumors claim that the incident inspired the red dress scene in the MGM movie Jezebel.
A red dress to the Olympus Ball while you're out of your senses.
Mademoiselle, une jeune fille ne porte pas une robe comme ça. D'ailleurs, c'est une robe de cette Marie Vicaire.
That creature, Julie. You heard what Madame Poulard said. That infamous Vickers.
Mary Vickers couldn't possibly do it justice.
Child, you're out of your mind. You know you can't wear red to the Olympus Ball.
Can't I? I'm going to. This is 1852, Dumpling. 1852, not the Dark Ages. Girls don't have to simper around in white just because they're not married.
And I believe the red dress scene in Gone with the Wind. Labor Day weekend in 1936, Thalberg was offered the opportunity to make Gone with the Wind into a movie, to which he turned down. He said he was too tired to be making any more epics after his last couple of movies took a lot of stress on him. Upon returning home that Monday, Thalberg was diagnosed with pneumonia and his condition worsened. When Thalberg was born, he suffered with blue baby syndrome, and he was not expected to live long past his 20s or 30s since his oxygen levels were not healthy. He had always suffered from poor health and even having heart attacks in his 20s. Shearer was very doting on Thalberg, even canceling many upcoming films to take care of him. She put her husband before her career. Although Thalberg could have been treated for his illness, penicillin had not made it to the West Coast, and even though Shearer pleaded with the doctors to send Thalberg to the East, the doctors found Shearer's advice to be interfering. He had oxygen tents installed at his home, but a few days later he passed away from his condition. He was 37. MGM and all of Hollywood was shocked, and Norma was stunned at the tragic loss. She lost a longtime friend and lover. Some of Thalberg's closest friends tried to keep his memory alive in the industry. Director and producer Cecil D. Mill had said, "The passing of Irving Thalberg is the greatest conceivable loss to the motion picture industry, and I say that absolutely without qualification. There are hundreds of executives, but only about 6 men with a genuine genius for making motion pictures, and Mr. Thalberg was the greatest of those. I have long considered him the most competent and inspired producer in the business." Norma's career in life was never the same, and she found herself in a very distressing battle at MGM. She fought to have profits from Thalberg's films go to his estate, and when MGM disagreed, she hired a lawyer and went to the press. This created an unflattering spotlight to be directed towards the infamous company, and they reluctantly gave in to the pressure, but at the cost of ruining any relationship she had there and therefore inhibiting her career. She worked hard to finish the roles she was casted by Thalberg, including 2 great films, such as Romeo and Juliet and the prestigious film Marie Antoinette, which cost over $2 million to film and was their last project together. MGM had started planning this movie as early as 1933, but didn't have the funds or means to start filming until 1934. But it was shelved because of Shearer's pregnancy with her second child. It was picked back up again in 1936. William Randolph Hearst initially tried to bribe MGM into casting his love interest Marion Davis as Marie Antoinette, but was incredibly frustrated when the role was promised to Thalberg's wife Shearer. This caused Hearst to break Marion's contract with MGM and move to Warner Brothers. The costumes were so lavish and highly detailed, they are still on the list of the most expensive costumes ever made in film history. The designer, Adrian, studied portraits of Marie Antoinette closely and made the costumes identical to the real dresses. Because of all the high-quality fabric and even using real gemstones, the dresses combined weighed over 1,700 pounds, while the wedding dress worn on set weighed 108 pounds alone. The budget on costumes was so overspent that the original plan was to shoot the film in Technicolor, but the wardrobe alone killed the remaining budget, which was a loss to the designer because the clothing was specially dyed to flatter Shearer. MGM wanted this film to be so grand they even had authentic, antique French furniture shipped to their studio. Some pieces were believed to originally be from Versailles.
You are King of France.
I'll be the first to say it. The king is dead. Long live the king!
I have here an order of the House authorizing me to remove the late Capet's son from the custody of his mother.
What did you say?
The convention's voted to take your son away from you. We've come to fetch you.
You mean you're going to take my little boy away from me? No. You can't mean that. Not today when you've taken his part. You have children yourselves. Perhaps you have hearts. You're not merciless.
Mama, don't let them take me. I don't want to go.
No, darling, no. You shan't go. They shan't take you. Let them take you. Charlotte, don't be frightened. It's all right. Mother won't let you go.
I'm sorry, madame, but the Assembly has given us orders and we must carry them out.
Just think I'd let you have my son. Go back to the fiends that sent you. Tell them I won't give up my child. Never, never, never will I have breath in my body.
Come, madame, all this is useless. We won't harm the child. Why won't you be sensible and let him go quietly since he must go?
Although one of the crown jewels in MGM history, its estimated loss of money in the film was $767,000. In all of Shearer's career, she claimed that this was her favorite role. Shearer was cast as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. MGM announced their choice and the film was already about to start its production. However, fans were in an uproar. They did not believe Shearer, who was born in Canada, should play the Southern Belle Scarlett. She received tons of threatening letters and her reputation was on the line. She felt forced to relinquish the role and step down. The search drastically continued to look for a Scarlett until Vivien Leigh was picked. But this didn't cause bitterness. Vivien and Norma got along quite well. Shearer came out later to say she stepped down because she didn't see a profit from a character like O'Hara, and she'd much rather play Rhett. Instead, Shearer starred in the 1939 film The Women, which was made of an entirely woman cast. It was a unique film that is still popularized today. She was able to play a woman on the verge of divorce as she discovers her husband's affair. She played alongside Joan Crawford, who played the mistress. This made an interesting spark on screen as the two women were always rivals.
This happens to be my room, Mrs. Haynes.
It's yours, yes, for the time being, like everything else you've got. May I suggest if you're dressing to please Stephen? Not that one. He doesn't like such obvious effects.
Thanks for the tip. But when anything I wear doesn't please Stephen, I take it off.
She had been a grieving widow for 2 years before she had an illicit romance with young actor James Stewart, then with the married actor George Raft. The affair became headline news, and although Raft expressed his want to marry Shearer, his wife would never grant him a divorce. MGM put pressure on Shearer and had her end the affair before they ended her contract. The 1940s signaled the end of her career, and although her 1940 hit Escape, this was her last success as she turned down major roles to star for box office failures. Perhaps without Thalberg, her judgment had been clouded. Regardless, she took her final bow from the spotlight and sank down into an early retirement. She married Martin Arouge in 1942, and she never went back into the spotlight again. She refused interviews and wanted to draw away from any social events. She was considered an next star in the movie world, and Hollywood left her behind. She was given a star on the Walk of Fame in 1960. She eventually passed away in 1982 of bronchial pneumonia. Prior to this, she was near blindness and suffered with dementia. She was 80 years old. Upon her request, she was buried with Irving. Her career was reevaluated and brought back into the light when TCM released several of her pre-code movies. Upon critiques and reviews, she was shown to play audacious female roles and had a fearless sense of character on screen. She was put back on the map as a legend, but her reputation surpassed her. A lot of critics claim that she relied on Thalberg to get her the roles that made her into the actress she was, but I disagree. Shearer had talent. She proved that throughout her career. She was loved immensely by her fans, and not just because of who she was, but who she could be on screen. She could be anyone, and her characters and emotions were relatable. I believe her career came to an end because she lost her courage, and I think Thalberg was that drive that made her want more. She lost her best friend, mentor, and muse.
I'm happy as a king, and foolish though it may seem, to me that's everything, the mere idea of you, the longing here for you. You'll never know how slow the moments go till I'm near to you. I see your face in every flower, your eyes in stars above. It's just the thought of you, the very thought of you, my love.
One thing we can say for certain is that Norma Shearer was immensely ambitious and was the epitome of sophistication. She never let anyone criticize her and get away with it. She showed everyone that no matter who says you're going to fail, you're the only decider of your fate, and you should only fail if you want to. Her story means a lot to me, and I find her ambition inspiring. She charmed her way into the industry, and although her reputation receded into obscurity, she will always be a pioneer and hard-working actress who never took no for an answer.
It's just the thought of you, the very thought of you,